looks like we're continuing on with our next installment of our biweekly webinar series for North Texas Soccer. And as I started building the series, I looked for people of high quality and character that I knew could bring in special insights and ideas into the coaching education realm. And immediately, one of the big names that came to my mind was Walter Clapton, who I've had pleasure of being in a course with, as well as serving in his current role as the executive director for South Carolina Youth Soccer Association. I think it brings in all kinds of talent. Now, when I asked him, I asked what he thought would be important and what coaches would really need and what really appreciate in their growth and development. He brought up the idea of ages and stages. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is an amazing topic that often gets neglected, and I don't know if it's due to not understanding or just all the different levels that go into it and the importance of it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you very much for joining us today. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. And you flatter me a little bit with saying it's a big name. Maybe big in circumference, not name, you know.
Oh, well, hey, takes all realms, huh? Get a little of everything.
No, appreciate you having me on. It's I'd said to you before, it's something we're trying to do in South Carolina, is get these kind of informal learning opportunities together for coaches. Licensing, obviously, we all do and take part in, but there's another part of education, and this is it, sharing our experiences along with our interpretations of content as well. So, no, very glad to be here. Like I said, I'll be asking you to return the favor at some point and come in with us. So,
for sure. Yeah, and it'd be my pleasure as well.
So I wanted to start off because I know you know me to an extent, but there's a lot that don't. So just like all of us, I love the sport, and that's what got me involved in the game. So at 16 was when I first started coaching. My older brother, who's probably been one of my biggest influences in coaching, he coached my youth team and asked me to go and help him out with the micros at the club that he was coaching me at. And at the time, right, it was just for some candy money, some gas money as I started driving. And then that slowly spiraled into just a love for working with kids and trying to help them on their soccer careers. And like I said, it started with the 4 and 5 year olds. Had some brilliant mentors along the way, as I'm sure we all have and we all seek. There was a guy called Brad Wellman, who was the Chicago Fire's under-21s coach. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, and he moved back to the UK and took over as the DOC at the club I was at, and kind of mentored me through my level 1, level 2 with the English FA, and then said to me, hey, look, if you're really looking at getting into coaching and you want more experience, then go to the US. So he connected me with a company that did seasonal training, and that was kind of it for me. I got the bug and kept going through licensing. Met my wife here back in 2015. And she said she didn't really fancy England. I'm not sure why, but she said she didn't fancy England, so that made the decision for our family, which was we'll be setting up shop in the US, and that's when I went through US soccer's licensing. I thought if I'm going to be here, then this will be the pathway that I go through now. Just recently finished off the A license and the DOC license this year, then obviously most recently in the educator license with yourself, but I'd been teaching Ds and grassroots since 2019. From a role perspective, I feel like I've been in quite a few since I moved to the US. So coached at near on every age group, from the Mummy and Me programs all the way through to the U19s, from recreational all the way through to the competitive leagues in the country. DOC at a few different clubs, BC United and Century United. May have heard of Century. They've got a bit of a national presence. Did sit on the board at our state association in PA West for a couple of years as well, while I was also on the coach educator staff for Terry Aguauji up there. So leading me to my final role at the moment, which is executive director and technical lead at SCYSA, which I came into February of last year.
Well, congratulations on that. And one thing that just popped off the top of my head, because I know you got to start off at 16, and kind of to lead into this ages and stages that we're going to discuss, did you make mistakes in the first round? I mean, can you remember back at that time, 16, what the 4-year-olds would think or how to train? Because I think that brings wealth and knowledge into the idea.
I cringe sometimes, right, when I look back at myself at 16. I think at that age, right, you don't know what you don't know, and then there's a little bit of that youthful arrogance, right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
but I do look back, and it was a lot of what probably I had when I was younger, which was you're dribbling through cones and there's lines, and you're not really taking into account a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old's stage of development. And you just kind of force them to do things that you would expect an 11, 12, 13-year-old to do, because at that time in my life, that was football. So I wanted the young kids to do it, because I've been asked, you got to teach the young kids. I was lucky with the mentors I had. Like I said, the guy Brad Wellman, who was DOC at the club. He came out, he would do a session, and then he would let me take the following session, so I'd be able to watch him do it, and then I could do it after. And then a company that I worked for, an ex-pro, Tarka Mustafa, he ran a company that did after-school programs and in-school programming with a focus on football. So I was able to watch him, and lucky, I suppose, between 16 and 19, as I was going through my level 1, level 2, and my youth modules, that I had people, they didn't just throw me on a field and say, hey, go on, go. I was able to watch and learn as I went. So yeah, being able to learn from their experiences was tremendously helpful. But yeah, looking back, it's crazy where I was to where I am now. But again, like I said, I didn't know what I didn't know, as we all did. So
Yeah. Well, that just take 1 second as I look at just for myself as well. When we started off in coaching, a lot of times it's even with our parents that we have that start off with a 4-year-old and they go on a field, they think they have an idea of soccer and what it should be. And like you said, the cones and just dribbling, that is their basic idea of what is. But I think this is one of the powerful ideas. Oh, look, we got another member. That's awesome. I love that. He's all ready to go too. But given that, I think sometimes that people don't know what they don't know, and this is one of the more powerful tools that'll help lead on to people to understanding. And I'm so glad we've got your partner in crime on the webinar today too. It makes it even better.
His age and stage, I've just got him trying to kick a ball at the moment. But no, it's this topic, for me, it's something that, again, I look back at 16, it was neglected from me. I think it's something we always talk about, and it's so cliche, right? This term ages and stages, and it's not just our federation, it's every federation. It's every federation around the world. So and for me, obviously you and I, we're both teaching grassroots and we're both teaching D courses. And this term now is so prevalent in our licensing and our education. And it's super powerful, but I think sometimes as coaches, we may misapply it. And I know I was. So for me, I want to try and help new coaches, or coaches that have a ton of experience, just kind of engage on this topic, because sometimes, right, they're not a mini adult and we think we're doing the right things, but when you actually sit back and you break it down and look at the consequences and the benefits of us acting a certain way or creating a certain environment, it was mind-blowing to me when I sat and analyzed my own environment. So the first thing here, and I'll ask the question to you, and I see we got Coach Eric that's came in.
Right.
Is there a team in your past, Warren, that you look back at, or the last team that you coached, and some of the characteristics you saw from them? If you could share the age group that they were or are, and some of the characteristics you saw from them.
Well, I'm going to go back to even when I first started playing, way back in a long time ago. I won't say the year because I don't want to date myself, but we were playing 11 aside at the 4-year-old and 5-year-old stage. So all the way through my career, it's always been 11 aside. And so, and if you think about it, just having like your son with one ball and 8 kids, well, obviously they're all going to want to play with the same ball, and so I think that the thoughts that we've gone through to try to change how it's presented, I think it's been huge. But I kind of think back to my high school guys, and I've taught anywhere from, because I've got 3 kids. I've got a 11-year-old, I've got an 18-year-old, I got a 25-year-old. And all 3 of them was so much different between coaching them through the 4-year-old stage all the way to my son, who I was blessed to be able to coach in high school, and all the way through. But how it changed differently and dramatically through each stage that they went through. And every time it was like you add a piece of the puzzle. The problem is I think we do the fire hose method, and the 4-year-olds, you can't, give them the fire hose and blow them away from the very beginning. But just the basic ideas of movement and play and whatnot. And I always made a mistake with the young ones, especially with my oldest daughter, is you're trying to produce a team that's going to spread out, get shape at 4, and it just doesn't happen. Rather than letting them develop and grow and teaching kind of a games method that mirrored their ages. That kind of makes sense. And so to me, I did it by the Braille method when I was going through coaching my oldest daughter. But now I wish I'd had all this information then, just to understand that there's a reason why everything's taught at a certain time.
Yeah, no, and like you said, I like that statement. I wish I knew then what I knew now.
Oh yeah.
I think it's moved on so much, right? We've taken more of an educational stance in the football world, and I think that's great, right? We've taken professional educators, and it's now coming into this space, and it's changing how we coach. The last team that I coached before I moved up, or sorry, not up but down to South Carolina, was a 2013 girls team, and they were under 9s at the time. And the club I was at, Century, we didn't have an under 9 girls coach, so I said, well, I'll cycle back. I've not got a team. I'll cycle back and I'll work with the under 9s. And I put these emojis down in the bottom right hand corner here, and that pretty much sums up every personality I had on this under 9 girls team. I had the one that was always happy. I had the one that was angry. I had one that was always sad and felt bad for other people. So, aside from when we look at these kids based on where they're currently at, what's going on in their life, and it was a real eye opener for me going back to the under 9s. I'd lived in the under 15 and above world for a few years. Been obviously around the younger ones because they're at the club, but going back to them, it was brilliant. So obviously, if anyone has taken a recent course with the federation, they would have seen the characteristics that we're currently looking at that are around the wheel here, and when we're looking at building a player-centered environment. So the kind of takeaways for me in this are, when we're looking at any age and stage, what is a player's ability to regulate themselves, their emotions, their attention, and this for me kind of is a nice overview of what I don't know what's here, 10 or 12, right? The types of things we need to consider as coaches when we're designing our objectives and we're looking at our principles and what player actions we might want to see, and then ultimately the interactions we want with players. Because it affects it all, and it's a hard job, right, for us to try and take all of this into account. And I know it's pretty common now that we all talk about spend equal time planning, executing, and also reviewing what we've done too. Because the planning part is huge. And I'm a firm believer that, as coaches, we cannot coach our way out of poor organization. If we've organized it and we've not planned properly, then we're going to struggle, and we're going to be forcing in interactions that maybe just aren't relevant, or they're not right for the group of players that are in front of us at that moment. So kind of the direction that I wanted to take this conversation, right, is we've obviously got the player. We want to be player centered, and we're looking at the characteristics and the variables in those 5 elements. But ultimately, we're trying to improve the skill within our players. And I know that the term holistic, right, is something that we've heard now for years and years and years across the last decade within the federation. And I think when we're obviously looking at skill, I'm a firm believer that the execution is just one part of it, right? There is an element of how do we communicate with the environment? What are we perceiving? And then obviously how we making a decision based on what we see, and then comes the execution part. So, there's things that have got to happen before we execute the skill, or let's say a player action instead there. And then the fitness element to it as well, and not from a you can be a marathon runner or you can run 8 miles in a game of soccer. But from a fatigue standpoint, mentally and physically, and obviously how that changes across the ages and stages as well. That on there. So apologize there. We've got someone calling the office line. Can you see my screen again or not?
There we go. This is good.
So the first one, obviously around that will, is How do they perceive their environment around them, and how do we help them what to look for, when to look for it? Right. As coaches, I'm sure we're all aware of when we step in and we do a freeze moment and we say, hey, when you saw this, what could you have done? And we're leading with those cues and we're leading with those triggers. But for me, and I tried to put a few visuals on here, right? So obviously, as we're looking at how they communicate with the environment and what they're trying to perceive, we go from U5 through U19, and it's just how do they move? Me and my ball, and I don't really care about anyone else, and I want to dribble through everyone, and my head's down, and I'm looking for pennies on the ground. But that's just them, right? They're 4 or 5 years old, all the way through. Well, it's me and my scanning skills now, and I am looking around me at other people. How do my actions affect my teammates, and then how do the opponent's movements affect what I might do next? All the way through personal development, and then obviously their career as well, if they're looking at going to college or they're trying to break into the pro game. So, there's this huge spectrum players are on that takes them on this journey, right? And I think when we ask the question, what does it mean for the environment we decide to create? I've just got 2 examples on here, right? Explore, disguise, reality. So it goes from players that are younger, that are just exploring their body and exploring the sport, to maybe we've got to disguise what development is for them because of the age and stage they're at, through now we're bringing them into a reality-based training situation that looks and is the real game broken down. And then obviously the formats at the bottom there too. As we go through the ages and stages more, you're obviously looking at, well, there's a reason the game is not 11v11, like when Warwick under 6s, under 7s play 11v11, and we are looking at 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s. I mean, I think, I don't know if you've seen the article on Germany recently, but they just redid their youth setup, and they're now playing smaller games, and I think they're down at 3v3. I think 7v7 is being hung on to now until maybe U11, U12. So, there is obviously a reason that, based on an age and a stage, we're dialing back 11v11 to prepare them for 11v11. And it's pretty common, right? Like I said, for me, I would have put kids in a 5v5 when I was 16 years old, and I had 10 kids in my training session. And that wasn't me thinking about where they're currently at, but I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, I'm sure you see it as well on courses that you've taught and continue to teach, that it's the same thing, right? When we get into this age and stage, and well, what can they actually perceive based on how old they are? I mean, you got 3 children, right? You said you had an 18-year-old,
5-year-old, and 11-year-old.
And I'm sure you've seen it with all 3 of them now. And you've got the spectrum, right? You've got the age and stage spectrum right now.
Oh no, for sure.
So you can.
I'll tell you what. Oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, even with all 3 of them, you saw the differences and the beauty of the changes that have made through because I was working coaching education all the way through all 3 of them, and the amount of change that U.S. soccer has made from that time to now has been unbelievable. But do you get much flack, do you think, even in South Carolina? Do you get as flack on changing it to a 3v3 or even a 2v2? I know it's been discussed a little bit, changing the younger age group side. Gosh, going back like 4-year-olds playing soccer now. I wonder how long it's going to be before your son is now on a team and going at 1 years old playing the game.
I think there's challenges, right? I mean, it's done differently around the state, and I know around the country too, right? Some clubs will consciously build a program, and they might be able to facilitate 2v2s, 3v3s at the youngest ages. I know some clubs can't, and they're strapped for coaches, right? They're asking coaches to take 3 or 4 teams if they wanted to dial back the format they're playing. So I think there's an issue with resources. There's not enough coaches to go around, and I think we're at a time where volunteerism is dwindling away, unfortunately. So at that most important age, where it's recreational players that need a volunteer coach, it's harder and harder to get them. So I think that's the balancing act. Clubs know it, right? We're all working in this industry. We all know the benefits of smaller sided games. But I think, like I said, there's that challenge of, do we have the field space? Do we have the goals? Have we got to buy more goals? Have we got to buy more paint? And now we've got a 4th color on these pitches to get a new field size. Um, and that's the balancing act that's the balancing act that we're all playing. But obviously, as the players get older, and I'll get into this a little further through, again, there's a reason we climb through the formats.
And then I was going to ask clarification on, I think I've got it, but when you talk about disguising play, is that like in the small age groups making fun little training games like sharks and
Yeah,
minnows
yeah,
or
correct.
like
So
Power Gold or something?
disguising what disguising technical development, like you said there, the fun games they would play at recess, but with a ball at their feet. And that
Eric, is Walter paused on your side too?
Yeah, he is.
Hopefully he'll come back here in a second. Oh, there you go. Say, you paused on us for a second.
is it back?
Yep, you're back.
Apologies. I'm not sure what happened there. No, I was just saying, right, those fun type of recess games that kids want to play. You put a ball at their feet, and that's what they're choosing to do, right? They're choosing to develop like that when they're at school, or they're at home, and they'll make all these games up. And we kind of got to meet them where they're at, right? If that's what their brain is saying, we need this. This is how we learn right now. It makes sense to obviously do that with them. But I don't know if you have any more questions here, Warren, before I move on.
Yeah. The only thing that kind of comes to mind too is that, I feel like
or
even
Eric.
this, oh yeah. But in this role here in North Texas, sometimes I wonder how we get the information out quickly to a parent that they step up and they say, okay, hey, I'll volunteer, because if I don't volunteer, then they're not going to keep my team, right? My kid doesn't get to play soccer. But I think this is unbelievably important for most of our coaches, because to me, if you don't understand the age and stage of the player, at least a frustration, you end up fighting a battle that you don't need to fight, that's understood better. So as I start to play with these ideas and through these webinars and through other means, I'm trying to figure out ways to get this information out to coaches. But with that, Eric, did you have something you were going to ask?
No, I can't argue with anything you said. I live in North Dakota, but we struggle with the same thing up here with finding volunteers to coach. And I know the only reason I started was because we needed a coach, and that was 4 years ago, and I don't know, I kind of loved it, so I haven't looked back. But I just over time I've kind of figured this stuff out on my own too. Like you were talking, the explore, disguise, reality. Like, yeah, if we try to do drills, the kids that I'm coaching are 7 and 9 right now. So if we try to do organized drills, they struggle to pay attention. But if I do a fun game that works on those skills, yeah, they're all in. So yeah, it's just kind of.
And you've got a funny spread there too, right? 7 to 9, because those 7-year-olds, you may still be disguising technical development. You may still be helping them explore agility, balance, coordination.
Yeah.
But then your 9-year-olds, they're probably being introduced to, positional games now, and they can be in a small-sided game where you put them in a formation and positions, and you're bringing a snippet of the game to them. So it's just interesting, right? And Eric, I'm sure you see too what the 7-year-olds perceive compared to the 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing here. Right? This is for me. Okay, when we look through the age groups, it goes from, like I said, looking at pennies and my own feet and the ball to, oh wait, I've got a teammate and I might be able to share the ball, to, oh, there's 4 or 5 of us and I've got 3 different options here to progress the ball or to try and score a goal.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously trying to match that environment is huge. Again, we all turn around and say, oh, the young ages, we want technical players. Okay, so again, that puts itself towards 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s to maximize time on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that matches up with where they're mentally at as well, right? So it all joins up, and I think there's a lot of dot connecting when we listen to the information we've got from multiple coaches, sources, courses. We can start joining all these dots now across the last decade, 2 decades, where they're all kind of intertwined, and we might have, heard them in a different package.
Absolutely.
So the next part to this, right, as we move around that wheel, is the decision-making aspect. So they've perceived their environment, but are we helping them solve problems autonomously? So this one for me is huge, because as we look through the age and stage and what it may dictate, right, it does dictate the type of experience that a player needs and what they want. So an under six may need broad experiences because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what a game of soccer looks like. So they've got a complete lack of reference points and understanding of the sport. So as coaches, we know that. So we've got to look at it and go, okay, well, can we give them broad experiences? I don't want to tell them that this is the only way you attack and this is the only way you can defend, or this is the only way you can break a line. They're going to need to see lots of different ways how to break a line, or whatever principle you may decide you want to work on with the players. But then on the flip side of that, right, if we look at the under 17s, 18s, 19s, we can work on specific situations because they can contextualize where to use it. And they know that not every attack is going to be this way, and this is a specific pattern or a specific play that our coach is asking us to refine. When we see the types of third man runs or a specific pattern that may end with a cross, it's highly likely, right, that a coach has turned around and said, this is a specific moment of the game that we weren't very successful in, and that's what we're going to work on. So easy for an older player to conceptualize, right? Making a specific decision in a certain situation versus a younger player who's kind of like, I need everything. I need to soak it all up. I need to figure out how to attack wherever I am on the field, and kind of broad experiences. So this one to me is huge. And the reference point thing too, because I think aside of the age, I think if we look at the stage a little bit more here, we've got some highly experienced under 8s, under 10s, under 12s. And I don't think that because you're an under 19, you're a highly experienced player, right? It's not, there's not direct correlation all the time. So it's one of the things we get on courses, right, is I've got the top of my roster, the bottom of my roster. They're the same age. They might show the same physical and emotional traits, but decision making is completely different. Experience within the sport is completely different. So as coaches, how we giving those players the types of situations they need, they want, or trying to just align everyone on what the reference point for a game of soccer is.
I like it.
And then moving into the cognitive side here. So, I just want to talk about the decision-making aspect a bit more. And I know your background's teaching, right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
So I'm sure you've seen this at multiple stages throughout your career, but this is just a basic model of cognitive development that I kind of use myself, is Piaget's model, right? It's a really easy one, I think, for us to understand. Right, it just gives us a real quick kind of overview of where children are at cognitively through these stages. Obviously, there are other ones. This is one that resonates to me here, and really, and let me just flip through my slides. Yeah, so I do have the overview there. Obviously, people can pause it to look at this or screenshot it, but for me, when I look at an overview of Piaget's model and how do I apply this in my planning and my execution, is the younger they are, they learn through actions. And that's what this whole model of cognitive development's about, right? It's younger players learn through actions. And as they get older, they learn through mental operation. It's processes that they can go through and contextualize because they can think abstractly. Using this model, young players are egocentric. It's about me. It's about my ball, and I don't want to share. To as I get older, I'm now team centric, and I understand how my actions affect other people. And again, I laugh because I look at this and I go, in the soccer world, we've been talking about this for decades. And when you look at the models that kind of back it up, it's eye opening, really. But it puts it in one nice place for us all. The ability to handle constancy. So a young player's I need variety. I need variety. I get bored. I've got no attention. And again, when we're looking at the ages and stages of that age group, right, that's what that's what happens. They don't have attention. We know that. So instead of 2 exercises the whole session, we might decide that we're going to do 4 or 5. We're not going to do an exercise for 30 minutes. We're going to do it for 15, and then we move on. So whereas with the older ones, right, I worked with an 09 group last year. Depending on what type of session it was, we might end up doing a 7v7 game for 45 minutes. But they obviously can handle the constancy there. And then lastly, my takeaway from Piaget's model is just the ability to think. Young players being concrete. So if we tell them, no, this is how it's done, they will do it every time, and they will think that's what they need to apply in every moment. Versus, again, the older players, they can go, oh, well, I do it in this situation, but in another situation, I might do it this way. If we teach a kid to pass, I've actually got it in here as well. So, yeah, if we teach a kid to pass with the inside of their foot, they're probably going to believe us that's the only way to pass a ball. But then as they get older and we introduce them to an outside of the foot or striking it with their laces to maybe drive the ball, they're taking in that information. They're like, oh, okay, there's other ways to do this. But when they're younger, right, it's that one way. And they might try and apply that for a shot, for a pass in every single situation that they're in. And schemas, is obviously tied to Piaget's model too, which anyone, I think, in the new format A, B, and I'm not sure if it's in the C, when we start looking at decision making and perception action coupling, right, we're developing schemas and we're improving schemas. So making sure that that we help players develop and associate certain actions and certain experiences to an outcome. So can we make sure that they've got the knowledge, right, but they also understand the process that they've got to go through, and make sure that we're constantly adding, because when we look at building blocks, right, from U6 all the way through U19, the principle of play may be break a line. And as they get older, we might break a line differently, to the point when we're in under 16 or under 17, it came from the number 10 dropped in, the number 8 got out. There was a rotation of players, a third man run that happened. So the complexity is more, but we've just been layering on schemas all the way from, under 8 onwards. So really interesting, but obviously, again, as players are getting older, their schemas are becoming more and more robust, versus when they're younger, right? And they don't really have a schema yet. We're just introducing them to certain concepts or certain principles. So
I like it. Let me ask you this too, I get to jump in. How often do you find it with coaches that are learning the material attaches strictly to a chronological age, not understanding that the development of players is over, kind of a width and a breadth, if you will, more so than just attached to an age, even though that gives you kind of a clue in. But like I said, how often do you find it where people think is chronologically only so or centered?
Yeah, I think it depends the level a lot of the time, right? And clubs that have the ability to have 3, 4, 5 teams in an age group, a lot of the time, right, the levels kind of balanced. Clubs that might be in more of a rural area where they're away from, I suppose, for us, it's if you're away from Columbia, Greenville, Charleston, you might be in a more rural area. You don't have the population density of those cities. So you may be pulling from 2 or 3 age groups, or the age group you've got, you could have some Q1, Q4s all mixed together. So I think we do see it. Right? I think that from the easiest way for us as coaches, right, is to look at chronological age. We just look at the birth year, we look at the age, and we generalize. If we're truly being player centered, right, then we've got to take into account the experience levels of those individual players. And again, I think on the recreational side of the game, when we're doing 11v11 grassroots courses here, we see it tremendously. And a lot of the questions we get from the coaches on those courses is, well, hey, look, I've got a player that just decided they wanted to come into the game this year. And I've got some kids that can't afford to play club or don't want to play club, so they're playing rec with us. And that does create some form of problems, right? And a coach may generalize and just go, oh, we're under 9 or we're under 17s and we're all kind of the same. Well, yeah, in some aspects, and that may be physically, it may not be cognitively. right? Maturity is going to be different. Emotionally is going to be very different too, right? Based on maybe your home environment, your school environment. So there's so many variables. I suppose it's easy for a coach or us coaches to generalize, but is it really right? I don't think so. Things, but if we're realistic and we write our player's name down in front of us, and we start actually looking at the five characteristics we looked at earlier, I'm sure that it would be very different as you went through your roster and started listing off. Okay, well, where are their language? Where's their language at? I've got a player that speaks like this. I got one that speaks to me like that. Emotionally, I've got a player that's upset all the time, and there's things going on in her life or his life. I've got a player that's really demonstrating that they're mentally strong and they're an emergent leader. So it's we've got to try and cater to them all. And I think the first step for us as coaches, right, is just listing it out and who's in front of me, who's on my team, because I may have different coaching points or interactions for certain players. Right. I said to you earlier, I had a player on that 2013 girls team. She was angry. I had to be positive with her because as soon as something was negative, it was even angrier. So it was a tremendous amount of positivity. I had some players that were really mature and they actually asked, how can I improve? What am I doing wrong? So they were open to criticism. I had some players that were not open to criticism. So when when you get into the weeds there, it's my interactions are changing and my content's actually changing based on the maturity or the characteristics of these kids in front of me. Which again is it takes time for us as a coach, but I think that's where we get into every player gets the same amount of attention from us, or is having the same amount of time from us as a coach spent on them and trying to understand them as a person and what they need and how they need it. Is something that we owe them.
And Eric, do you see that variability within your sevens and nines?
Yes, absolutely. Seems like and it kind of varies by the week too. I kind of joke that it's like if we have a bad practice, I joke about it being close to a full moon or something, just trouble paying attention. But you can definitely tell that skill level and focus. There's areas where some kids, thrive, like defense, or other kids are really strong on offense, dribbling, different things. So it's just kind of, you almost got to pick what most of the kids need to work on and kind of focus on that, and then the ones that are struggling with the smaller ones kind of address them on a one-on-one basis. But yeah, even just personality wise, there's I kind of in general, I think kids appreciate more positive feedback than anything, but I've definitely noticed it as they've gotten older, they're more open to constructive criticism as long as it's kind of sandwiched between some positive things. So
yeah, and Eric, you made a great point there, like the focus aspect, right? So you may have some players that their attention span is still short. They might be immature as a 9-year-old. So from a session design perspective, if we look at that and go, okay, well, this player may need to be rotated more frequently, or I've got to make sure that I have multiple activities for this player to move through, because the variability, right? It's a consequence would be they get maybe less repetitions in a certain situation that we built for them. Positive maybe I've got their attention and I've shown them more experiences, and we know a younger player may need broad experiences as they're trying to figure out how to make decisions on their own and obviously in real time within a game. So that's to the extent I think we've got to start looking at, right? Is again, Eric gave a great point there about maturity of players and focus. How does that impact my session design? How does that impact how I'm going to give information? Because maybe I've got to give one-on-one bits of information over the flow to that player to keep them engaged. Maybe I know that, I've got lack of attention in my session, so I'm not going to do freeze moments. If I've got a 5v5 or a 6v6 going on, I'm not going to do freezes. I might do something where I'm around a dry erase board and I let them move my magnets to paint a picture instead. So all those kind of things, like I said, and it's who's in front of me and how's that going to impact my coaching points, and then how's that going to impact how I design the session, and how's that going to impact my interactions with these kids. Because obviously there's that domino effect the whole way through. And then lastly, or not lastly, because we got fitness after this, but on the execution side, right? I think we all rush here as coaches because we love it when Modric swazzes a ball with the outside of his foot and he sets up Benzema. Like, we love that stuff. But obviously, prior to the execution, they perceived what was going on. They had to make a decision, then they executed it. And as coaches, and we know this, right? If we just use our subjective experience, we know what we can expect out of an under 6 passing a ball compared to an under 19, right? We know what we can expect from a general perspective, at what age a player might be able to start curling a ball, using the outside of their foot, driving a ball. So we've got to be realistic as coaches, right? On what can I expect from these players? They don't understand their body fully yet, or if they're going through a growth spurt. And we just had this with the 09s last year. We got some boys going through a massive growth spurt, and they were awkward, right? They were big, they were tall, they were off balance all the time, and that had a huge impact on striking a ball, their angles of approach, right? Their legs are all changing sizes. And it was amazing to see, right? It was that U14 going into U15 year. So what can we expect from a technical standpoint based on their age and stage? Matching skills to situations, right? At that young age, they may try and generalize a certain type of pass to every situation, right? There's no weight to it. It's just forward pass. And it could be hard, it could be soft. There's an inconsistency to their execution. Whereas with older players, they may know that in a certain situation, the only way to get the cross in is with the outside of their right foot, or they may want to disguise it. So they've got a specific situation and they'll match a skill to that situation. So, and it does all the way through a player's career, right? We kind of got to be aware of this, because we can say all we want, they should have done this. Okay, but based on where they're at, was that even a realistic expectation? I would have loved my under 9 girls team a few years back to be able to play wide and whip across him with the inside of their foot, right at the front post. They couldn't do it. Just where they were at in their own development, that was unrealistic. They got the ball wide, but if a cross was coming in, right, it was being slashed out for a goal kick because they didn't know how to wrap their hips around and shoulders around as they struck the ball yet. So just a situation that they've just been experienced to, and they don't really know how to match a certain skill to it yet, because we tie this back to the decision, just lack of reference point. And then lastly, for me, this is a huge one, is the agility, balance, coordination, or other physical traits from a motor skill perspective of a player. Because again, you could have a player start playing soccer at 13, 14 years old, playing with a player that has been playing since they were 5 or 6. So when we get into those types of situations, right, if a player is off balance, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, it might be in Thierry Henry actually, and he was talking about how players that are one-footed, one-sided, they're off balance when they're on their other foot. They never trained on both sides of their body, so when you get them in a situation where they're not on their dominant side, they're off balance, right? Because they've never practiced those movement skills in those types of situations. So that I was thinking about that a lot. Something that I feel like should be common sense, but until I was listening to it on that podcast, I'm like, no, this makes total sense. When we get players, right, and you hear this on the sidelines all the time, you should have used your left foot. You should have used your left foot. And the reality is they don't know how to plant their foot. They don't know how to shape their body because they've never practiced those situations. So to them, they've defaulted to their right foot because they know how to plant, they know how to be balanced. So, that was an interesting comment to me, and obviously how it affects technical execution. But again, age of a player, young players are clumsy, right? The amount of fouls we see at 5v5, 7v7, they're clumsy. They're big, they're clumsy, they don't understand their body. Agility, balance, and coordination is always developing, but obviously is hindered in growth spurts and changes in growth spurts too. So all having an effect on the execution of skill. So what can we expect, or should we expect, from our players as they progress through and along that spectrum? Now, I don't know if you got any questions there, Warren or Eric, before I move into fitness here.
Perfectly said. I really like the idea, like you said, on the balance issue with Thierry Henry. It makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Yeah, and it was crazy listening to it, because we see it every weekend, I feel like. every weekend we see players that may be dominant on one side, very one-footed. And I'm not going to say it's bad, right? We've got one of the greatest players in the world is severely left-footed. But he's very balanced at the same time. So, yeah, when we look at these young players, we expect them to execute something, but have we trained that? Did we allow them to get repetitions where instead of a ball coming from their left side, it was coming from their right side? And they just got to go through the mechanics of receiving a ball with pressure on them in that situation versus always coming from a clockwise rotation, for example. So there's so much that goes into it. And again, when we're having this age and stage conversation, right, I suppose it's an expectation. What can we expect based on where they're at, who they are, their traits as an individual and their traits biologically and chronologically too, right? What are our expectations as a coach and how are we planning on improving them? And then lastly, tying this into the fitness side. And, I nearly didn't put this in because I obviously from a prepubescent standpoint, we can't develop what we would all probably consider, fitness, right? We kind of generalize it to maybe aerobic fitness in players. But if we look at this physically and mentally, I think this plays a huge role too, because I read an article the other day, and I don't know if you've ever read this, Warren, but there was a study done by a university, and the study was on recovery rates in youth through adults. And I think it was a French study. And the study essentially came out with the conclusion of youth soccer players recover at a quicker rate than professionals. So the under 8, 9, 10s, 11s were recovering faster than like a Kylian Mbappe. And you look at it and I'm looking at that going, okay, well, how would that affect the environments I put together? And when I'm looking at it, I'm going, okay, well, that means I can do more repetitions of something. I can have more breaks because they recover really quickly, but I can get more reps in. And it was all linked back to obviously their muscles being like elastic bands and they don't fatigue like a adult does. But it was interesting because you're looking at it going, okay, well, young players need 1v1s and 2v2s. We know that's more physically demanding, but now we also know that they recover quicker than an adult. So how do we now change what we're doing? And does that mean instead of just 1 or 2 1v1 or 2v2 exercises, we could do 3 of them? I don't know, but it's something for us to consider. Something for us to consider as coaches, right? Is that from the recovery aspect? Is if they can recover that quickly, what does that do to us? How does that mean we change what we plan? Obviously, then compared to the older players, right? We know that if you're coaching high school right now, we know that with that high school group, when they're playing 2 or 3 days a week, if you're doing 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s with them, you're killing them. So, you might decide you're going to play bigger games to reduce their load, which again also ties back in with their characteristics of being able to see the bigger game and their impact on their teammates. Second
I love that. And I was going to just throw in a quick little example. I was thinking of, just your son. Like right now, he's going to go 90 miles an hour. Boom, he's down for a nap, and then he's back up again. But you see it all the way through. And then I thought about me last week when we got in and played, and my God, I don't think I recovered yet. So kind of that same perspective.
And it's like you said, you can immediately pull an example of your kids. And I'm looking at mine. He had a 30-minute nap earlier. Right, he wakes up at 6:30. Goes down at 9:30, and then bam, he's straight back up at 10:30, and he's got more energy than he did in the morning. So it's
not fair.
It's not, but that's kind of where they're at. And it does have an impact on what we do, right? It's those quick bursts, and they get a sip of water, and they're ready to go again. And I'm refreshed, and I'm gonna go. Let's go. With the young ones, I used to call it recharge. Go recharge with your pen. They go get their water bottle, they'll sip, and they'd come back like the Energizer Bunny all over again. So, but it does. It means we can change how we coach. We can change how we plan. But everything has an impact. Everything has an impact and can cause us to act a certain way. I've got in here too the ability to execute soccer actions for prolonged periods of time. When we talk about, on these previous slides, the need for variability and broad experiences for the young age groups. They can't execute the same thing. If we look at, focus, Eric said it earlier, the focus aspect, they can't concentrate. They struggle when something is concrete. It's, you look at it and you go, okay, well, a young player is going to, you know, after doing a passing exercise for 10 minutes, they've lost focus, they're bored, they just can't mentally handle it. It's from a concentration standpoint, can we even get a high quality of action out of them for an hour, for 90 minutes? I would say, if obviously the recommendations globally for these young ages is we're playing 2 20-minute halves, you know, we're being told that 40 minutes is pretty much their threshold for doing anything with, you know, doing anything consistently or of quality for a certain amount of time. So that plays into it as well. And again, this is more of a, not a fitness, but more of a fatigue on the mental side as well, right? With your high school players, our expectation is, no, you can execute this with technical ability for 60 to 90 minutes. With these young
No, and
ones,
yeah, even with the young ones too, when I'm thinking, just to play off that too, is that you take in the school day, you know, so a little guy's been going at for all day long, and maybe Lord knows what they had or produced, and then they come out to the field. Sometimes they're in that recovery moment as well. Or are you trying to teach them something when they're exhausted from a practice the day before? So I think this leads hugely important into what you're saying. You know, 'cause sometimes do we press kids beyond what they're able to execute mentally, given their time of day, or, you know, whatever's going on within the background. So man, I love this. I love that you added this to it.
yeah, and it's like I said, I nearly didn't, just because at the younger ages, obviously we don't fitness. You know, fitness is not something we can develop, right? Their lungs, they can't develop the type of fitness we would expect out of a high school group and a 15 and above group. But recovery does play a part. Mental fatigue does play a part. I mean, I used to be in a small school district. The athletes in the school played baseball, soccer, volleyball. They played it all. So what would end up happening was you could get them at their soccer practice and they were spent already. They could have a 7 o'clock game on a Thursday night, but they'd already been running cross country after school. So, you know, the physical and the mental fatigue did play a role into planning. And again, based on a kid's age, that does impact their recovery time and what we can ask or what we can expect out of them as we're planning our training sessions. I mean, for young ones, I don't like going past 60 to 75 minutes, but the sessions are quick, right? There's a ton of variability in there, and I'm trying to move it along, and we're doing different 1v1s, 2v1s, 2v2s. I'm trying to make sure that there's lots of different experiences, and my coaching interventions are maybe 30 to 60 seconds max, because I know that after 60 minutes, I'm probably starting to lose them just from having to be in a training session for a certain amount of time. And from a maturity standpoint, they can't take it yet. So it's yeah, I think it's got to be in there. Like I said, and all these four things are intertwined around the actual skill, right? If as coaches, I think sometimes we might look at straight, oh, it was a bad pass. Okay, but what did they see? Why did they make the decision? And then was it bad execution? Was it a bad decision? Did they not see the cue or the trigger to do what maybe they could have done? And then obviously from a fatigue standpoint, could they even execute it? Are they tired? Did they have, I mean, I got a phone call earlier from one of our clubs talking about an injury. They just got in the third game of a tournament over in Savannah. And I asked him when he said that he's got injuries and they were struggling with state cup participation. I turned around and said, well, what game was it? He said it was number 3. I said, of course. So, you know, and that's obviously one of the most common things that we see is when you've got physical fatigue, injuries may occur because you've got poor agility, balance, coordination. You're struggling to run. Your muscles are weak. When you're cutting and you're turning. So, yeah, all intertwined and all have an impact on what we're asking out of these players. But to kind of put a bow on it, you know, this is obviously, you'll see this in the D license, C license, B license when we're looking at planning. But truly, if we're looking at who's in front of us, right, it's based on that, can we define the objectives? And this may be for the season, right? It may not be each session. It may be, these are my seasonal objectives, or for a block of time, a 2 or 3 week block. These are the objectives. Based on the objectives of this age group, what are the desired actions? And again, if we're looking at the young ones, it may just be me and my ball, comfortable one-on-one, being able to disguise, right? Drop a shoulder, just beat someone with disguise. Could be basic one-on-one defending skills. But what are the desired actions I want based on the objectives for where they're at? then what are my coaching points going to be? And this differs, right? Sometimes as coaches, we may see things relevant to the topic as we're doing it, but other times, for me, I like predetermining what my coaching points are going to be. I know if I'm introducing them to a certain principle or action, it may be something that they've been introduced to the season before, so they've got prior knowledge and prior understanding of it. But what do I want them to leave my session understanding or having knowledge of or being able to execute? And then I go into designing my activity in my session, because I've got to create an environment that not just allows the coaching points to come out, but allows them to be able to experience and use the player actions or the principles that we actually want them to see and experience and get repetitions in. And this obviously gets tied into now the type of session, right? I may decide I'm doing progressive part, whole, all the different types, even play, practice, play, OLI, all the different methods we've seen or session structures over the years. But is there a certain type of session that is better for the outcome I need? And then the activity type too, right? Am I doing something that is what we call now non-game form? Am I doing something that's modified game form? Am I doing game form? And based on their age, their stage again, what do they need to see? And obviously you see this on the D course now with the under sixes, it's a lot of non-game form, and not in the sense of you and I passing back and forth, in the sense of we're playing freeze tag and there's not goals. We've all got a ball. We're chasing each other. We're dodging, ducking, diving, and it's non-game form activities to disguise learning. Then obviously progressing through, you may decide with under eights, under nines, you want to do something that's more play, practice, playing. It's going to be all modified game form and game form activities. To the older players, and I'll use the high school example again, in a high school season, you may do non-game form activities from a passing pattern perspective or walkthroughs because you're on a recovery day. So where are players at, and why would I choose this type of activity? Why would I choose this type of session? And then how does it complement the coaching points, the objectives, and the actions that I just said I wanted to actually develop? And then lastly here, obviously the type of interaction. So why would I choose a freeze moment? Why would I choose a natural stoppage? Why would I let them go through trial and error? And again, trial and error for young ones as they're just trying to figure out and obtain new experiences. And with older ones, I may use more freeze moments because they've got tons of experiences and they need shown in this moment how I wanted them to solve the problem. So obviously interactions come in last there, but based on their age, their stage, how would I build this interaction, and why is the interaction what it is? And obviously any coaches going through the new licensing will see the player development framework, which I think is a great resource, and I've used a lot of it within this presentation here. But really as coaches, just being cognizant, right, of where they're at, and then how do we plan, and what is the impact on our planning all the way through this process, because it's not the one size fits all approach. And as much as we all talk about it, I think from an actual application standpoint, I'm not sure we're all using it, right? And I'm a culprit of it too. But hopefully these experiences and some of this here, just on the learning I've done the last few years, help some other coaches, not make mistakes that I've made across my last 15 years of coaching here. So
I love it. To kind of plug the education pathway U.S. soccer. I mean, it's neat how they model that within the 4v4, the 77, 99, 11v11, be specific to all the needs of those age groups that we're coaching. So, if you're watching this webinar, you have more questions. It's really delved deep in all the way through the coaching education pathway. And so I would strongly recommend anybody that's really interested in this topic to go ahead and find the level they're coaching at, the game model that they have, and then take the course appropriate to that, and it'll dive into exactly what Walter's been discussing. And that's right, really, really good and really, really interesting, and even more so as we start to learn and get better at it. Gosh, I was telling somebody the other day, I wish I could go back and tell my first year coaching self all this stuff, because how much further we've been ahead at this point in time had I known what you're presenting right now. So I mean, it's unbelievably effective.
Yeah, and it's, again, like I say, it's so intertwined again, and I'll use the holistic tenet, right? Everything is connected. Everything has an impact on the next. But how do we just make sure we're aware and we're actually thinking about these things? Because again, if we say we're player centered, then we should be thinking about these things, and we should be thinking about how they all connect. And yes, there'll be consequences, but there will also be benefits, and that's obviously the trade-off that we're trying to find as coaches. Is, can I live with that consequence because of the benefits my players are going to get from it? Does the consequence outweigh the benefit, or vice versa? And am I going to continue to make this decision because of the benefits? But I think to be more cognizant, right? I think to have a greater level of self-awareness of the consequences is probably one of the most impactful things I think we can be aware of as coaches. And like you said, if we were aware of this 10, 15, 20 years ago, would have been 10, 15, 20 years ahead of where we're at right now. So no, yeah, but very interesting. And it's been interesting for me teaching it as well right now, because obviously it's not just a shift for coaches coming into courses, right? It's a shift for us as educators too. As these theories come into play and we learn about them, we learn about them in greater depth than maybe we understood them before. So
For sure. And then I wonder how many people are frustrated, that have good intentions going out to the training session to practice, and the frustration of what they're presenting is more about a discrepancy in the age and stage that they're trying to relate to, over a good-hearted, good, meaningful session that they've put together with all good intentions, but aren't hitting the players where they need, which leads to that frustration, which then leads to somebody getting out of coaching because it was more about them not understanding who their players were in front of them, as opposed to them not having the soccer knowledge to give that information out.
Yeah, I suppose the best example, right, is when we walk up to a field and there's a passing pattern going on, and the type of rotation the coach wants isn't working, and the players are more confused about the rotation than they are actually passing the ball. And the drill or the exercise breaks down because the coach is trying to manage player movement. And no, you go here and you pass right, but you got to move left. Like you said, and a lot of the time it's because as coaches we might have seen someone else do it and thought, oh, that'd be great, and it would be great if our players were at that age and stage, or at that stage. But all players are different, right? And just because we see it working with someone else doesn't say that we can just pull it and get it to work with it. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's tons of sessions that you've probably seen, I've seen, that we've changed a little bit, or said, hey, I can do that with my players. But again, we just got to be cognizant of, am I doing it because I liked watching that team do it, or am I doing it because this is the actual needs of my team based on their characteristics at this moment in time? But yeah, I think this reflection model and having a better self-awareness of who's in front of us is going to be so beneficial to these players. And I look back and go, I wish that I had that as a player, because it was kind of simple swim when we were younger, right? It was, if you could concentrate and you could focus and you could understand what that unopposed activity correlated to a real game, you would thrive. And if you couldn't, you were just trying to survive, and everyone was mad and frustrated at you because, like, come on, like, you move to your left after you pass right. How do you not understand that? And now we know all this, and it's like, well, they weren't ready for that yet. They didn't understand what the real game was meant to look like, so they couldn't even conceptualize this. And we were all getting angry at them, but it was more of a failing of just teaching methods, right, than it was a player. It wasn't that they weren't putting effort in. Maybe the exercise was just a mismatch for their age and their stage. So,
no, that makes perfect sense. Eric, you got anything that you had questions on?
No, I don't think so. It's all good stuff. So thanks for jumping on and talking to us. Sorry I was a little late.
No, I just I appreciate coming in. I've said this to you before, and it's, licenses are one thing for us, but these types of opportunities here, where we all get to kind of, I suppose, digest what is going on licensing and how it's actually being applied in the real world. For me, that's where a lot of it comes together. Is it's all well and good talking about in magical soccer land that this is what's going to happen, this is the theory, and this is blah blah blah. When we actually get back onto the grass, it's not how we thought it was going to be in the cookbook, right? It kind of looks a lot different. So no, these conversations I think are invaluable. And as coaches, this is what we want, right? We want football conversations, we want soccer conversations with each other. So like I said, I'll be asking you to return the favor, so I get to sit on the other end of of listening to other experiences and knowledge. So no, thank you again for having me, man. It's like I said, it's been great.
I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and especially with your schedule. And I really appreciate your helper, providing his input from the side there. He's been awesome. And I know, being a dad, I kind of miss that age and stage as well now that my boy's off in college. So enjoy that while it goes. But with that being said, I want to close out this one, but I want to welcome everybody, or actually encourage everybody to join us next time on the 4th of December. We're going to be bringing in Sam Snow, kind of further answering a question that a lot of coaches have in the coaching education process, and that's the skill acquisition piece. How do you incorporate skill development within the framework of the coaching models? And I think it's going to be really interesting. He's actually going to go over 2 parts because he couldn't stick it all in one. So we're going to go over the next 2 times. And then come in the spring of 24, we got lots of presenters lined up, ready to go. Some exciting, we got one that's kind of goes to the whole thing about load, cognitive load, physical load. We're going to have one of the head of U.S. Soccer's on board to discuss that and the training cycle over a week. And some of the stuff we saw this last week was super interesting based upon that. So I want to encourage everybody to make sure you register, subscribe to the YouTube channel that will be posted on soon. And once again, Walter, thank you for taking the time, and we'll sure put it in. And like I said, I'm sure we'll have many more conversations to continue this process on. And thanks, Eric, for joining and adding your input as well. And with that, I'll close out this session, and we'll see everybody on the 4th.
Yeah, thanks so much, Warren.